Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading to haunted houses for our collection of stories, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Michigan. Before I was born, my parents and my sister were planning to move to Michigan in 1996 due to my father getting a new job there that required them to relocate. My father found a 5-bedroom, 3-bath ranch-style home in Michigan, hidden in the trees alongside a private country club and golf course that had been in operation since 1922, sitting on what was ironically called Clubhouse Drive. The home provided gorgeous views of the fairways, filled with tons of oaks and pine trees everywhere. My grandparents on my mum's side decided it was a good venture to join my family, so they could assist with my sisters while my parents had to work. It was the perfect place to start a new chapter that bring my grandparents and family together as one. This move was one of the biggest highlights in our family, which eventually brought me into this world when I was born in the house in the year 2000. This is my true eyewitness testimony of the haunting of Clubhouse Drive. This is a 2-story house with a main floor and a fully finished basement where my grandparents lived while our family had the main floor. The house is built into a hill, so the backside of the basement is built into the ground, and the opposite side has many windows looking out into the backyard that features 4 levels of terraces filled with pine trees and bushes. Off the final terrace is the view of our backyard that backs up to the woods. In January of 1997, my family moved in, and I can recall weird encounters starting to happen as early back as when I was a year or 2 old. The activity seemed to start after I was born, as no one in my family can recall anything strange happening prior to the year 2000. My sister Lauren's room was located in the basement of the house across from our grandparents' kitchen. From the very beginning of her moving down there in 2000, she said that she felt a strange presence of a man called James in the basement who liked to smoke. There were a few times at night that she would randomly get whiffs of cigarette smoke in the basement. Lauren never told us until a few months ago actually, as no one in our family smoked cigarettes, ever. And my parents and grandparents would have hit the ceiling if they found out anyone was smoking. One time in the middle of the night, the shade in Lauren's window shut up all by itself, which caused Lauren to hide under the blankets. Utterly terrified, another time in the middle of the night, her carousel sitting on her dresser across the room began playing on its own. This particular carousel must be wound up first for it to play, and it can't just go off all on its own. It started playing from the beginning to the very end, and something had wound it up for it to start playing. My grandma Betty would watch me during the day while my parents worked, and my sisters were off at school. One winter afternoon while my grandpa was sitting in the living room across with me, she saw a white, bright apparition of a skeleton float across a wall into the front foyer. I believe this next thing happened within the same year, and it's even more terrifying. My sisters were up watching late-night TV in the main living room. Everyone else was asleep, including myself. Lauren had been facing our TV set, which had a glass window on the left for DVDs, and it reflected the view into the dining room and kitchen through it. All of a sudden, Lauren saw a black figure standing in front of the back door of the kitchen, through the reflection of the glass. After it just stood there, it started walking into the kitchen past the wall out of view. Without informing Alex what she just saw, Lauren took off down to her room, leaving Alex in a state of panic. She ran to our room where I was. My sister Alex still has a good memory of this night, and it terrifies me to know this entity was in the room next over from me, since Alex and I shared the room from across our kitchen on the main level. It's haunting to know just how close it was, and that it showed itself to my sister that night while slinking around in our kitchen. After that, Lauren never saw the entity again. It was a one-time experience, but was not the only one it would happen to. And it wasn't the last time either. One day my two sisters were downstairs in Lauren's room, and they heard a deep growl come from near the wall of the room. I remember them coming up to tell me about it, and all three of us became very scared of the basement. Little did we understand that the activity would soon pick up, and we were totally unaware of what would occur in the next decade. A few years later, around 2004, my grandma Betty was downstairs in her living room reading the newspaper one afternoon. My grandpa was upstairs in the garage, and myself as well as my family were out at school and work, as you can imagine. Well, from the corner of her eye, she saw something move in the hallway across from where she was sitting on the couch. When she looked up, she saw a black figure floating all the way across the living room that went into her grandpa's bedroom. I remember her telling us this a couple of times later when us kids were older, and this story never changed each time she told it. She's always been a woman of honesty and highly credible. The thing about my grandma is that she always has some new, strange experience about the house to share with us, and even still to this day at the age of 95, when her and I would talk about paranormal events happening in our house. One of the things she told me over and over was that when us kids were much younger and would go out on the weekends with our parents to the lake, her and Grandpa would be abruptly jolted by the sound of a door slamming shut upstairs in the evening, when no one was home or upstairs at all. She indicated that the door would slam as hard as possible, and she would tell me this would happen when there was absolutely no wind outside and the windows had been closed. She would always go on to say that it had to have been mine and Alex's bedroom or bathroom door. It happened on at least 3 occasions when my family and I were out at the lake in the summer, and it spooked my grandma quite a bit the more it continued to happen while my family and I were away for the day. She told us she would be sitting in her living room downstairs with Grandpa, and boom, they'd be jolted up by a door slamming upstairs. One night towards the late 2000s, I was up late with my sister watching TV in the living room. Everyone else in the house was asleep in bed. It was probably just after midnight. At one point, the three of us got up to go raid the kitchen. When I walked into the kitchen, I remember tripping on a giant transparent salad bowl that was laying upside down on the rug in front of the fridge. It belonged in the cabinet above the fridge, so we didn't think much of it and put it back in its proper place where it couldn't possibly fall. Then, we went on raiding the kitchen for some late-night snacking. A little while later, while the three of us were still in the living room watching TV, we suddenly heard a loud crash in the kitchen, like something fell from a height. We all jumped up and ran to see what fell. When we got in there, we saw the same salad bowl flipped upside down thing sitting on the rug again. We were all scared out of our minds. At this point, all three of us were 100% convinced the house was haunted, with no doubt in our mind anymore. We started to get the feeling that there was a presence among us to be mindful of, and this was my first experience I ever had in that house. I can't remember if it was the same night or another night, but us 3 kids were in the living room late at night again, and my sister's phone that was sitting on the table next to us took off onto the floor on its own, which made the few papers it was sitting on jolt as well. All 3 of us witnessed it, and not one of us was close enough to the table to have moved it. I remember Lauren and Alex going nuts about how it was a poltergeist. Being young, I had no idea what that meant, so I asked and they told me. I became much more terrified of the house at night after that. During the daytime, I always felt safe again, much like Alex and Lauren did, but at night the house had a very scary feeling to it that I still feel when I'm there today. I can't explain it, but you just feel you're alone with something otherworldly. That's probably the best way that I can put it into words anyway. There were several times I would hear footsteps all throughout the main floor while everyone was asleep in the middle of the night. They were very slow footsteps, and I had a lot of restless nights because of the array of mysterious sounds I'd hear outside my room all night long for many years, a lot of which were natural sounds the house would make when it settles, but other sounds I heard were far from the house, just settling. In 2007, we brought a new family member into the house, a baby Cairn Terrier Poodle mix that was saved from a house fire up north. We called her Bella. She was the most rare, beautiful, and oh so adorable dog I've ever seen. She looked like a sort of mini Labrador. She was the perfect new addition to our family, and she was always loved so immensely and brought such good energy to our home. In 2010, Lauren moved out of the house and went off on her own to do college and work. She'd come back to visit here and there, and when she did, the house seemed to react to it. Not long after she moved out, I woke up one morning and walked out into the hall, almost stepping on a picture frame that was left face down on the carpet. I picked it up, and the photo frame was of Lauren in high school that we kept on the wall. When I looked at it, I was shocked by what I was seeing. There was an orange color mark imprinted right over Lauren's entire face. It honestly looked like it was supposed to be a flame. The glass was still intact from what I remember, so how in the world could this mark just appear when it was never there before while the photo was still behind the glass? And why was it also on the floor just randomly after she moved out? It was really as if a spirit had some kind of message or feeling about Lauren leaving, or reacting to her going. I've always had the feeling that this presence didn't particularly like her, and this seems to be a confirmation of that for me. Since Lauren was no longer living in the second bedroom downstairs, Alex moved into it, and I was now living in a room by myself upstairs, above my grandparents' kitchen. In November of 2011, we lost our grandfather. He was very sick at a nursing home and passed away there. It was very saddening for our family, especially my mother and grandma. When Lauren would come home to visit, she would always stay up late into the early hours of the morning watching TV and playing Sims on her MacBook in the living room upstairs. One of these times, I believe it was before Grandpa died, Lauren said that she had been in the living room on the recliner at 2 a.m. when she began to hear a voice downstairs. She also heard what sounded like furniture moving around. She'd gone downstairs to see if anyone was up, and no one was, and she was horrified after that finding. On a different night the same week she came to see us, she was about to go to bed. She went to the bathroom and heard shuffling next to the bathroom of my wall, and then she heard a male voice say her name loud and clear from somewhere in the hallway or dining room. She woke me up asking if I had said a name. Then I told her I hadn't, that I'd been asleep. Alex was already upstairs as Lauren told her what just happened, and we were all talking about it when our dad came to the kitchen, where we were. Lauren asked if he was messing with her, and he swore he did not say her name and had just gotten up to get water. One of these times on a Sunday morning, she was sleeping in the guest bed in my room, and me and my family had gone to church. She told us she woke up hearing breathing coming from my bed. At first she thought I was still home and that I didn't go to church with them, but when she looked up at my bed to see for sure, she realized I was in fact not there at all, and that she was home alone. Another time when she came in to visit, she and I were still up together late in the living room while Alex was sleeping in her room downstairs. Lauren was in my room getting something, and she came running into the living room saying she just heard a female voice talking downstairs in the kitchen, and she was hearing it through the air duct on my floor. We went down and did a full investigation, but no one was awake down there. We woke up and asked Alex if she was watching any videos or talking, and she said no, she had been asleep, and it was just all around bizarre. I can't remember when, but my mum had a really bizarre experience in the garage one night, and we would all joke about it and make light of it. She said she was coming inside from taking the trash out and heard an intense slurping sound coming from behind my grandparents' van on the right side of the garage. She ran inside because it really frightened her. There were two very strange incidents that happened a few months later in 2012 after our grandpa had passed away, and they both happened on the same day. It was a very eerie, cloudy winter day with no snow. It must have been a Monday. My mum, my sister Alex, and Grandma, Bella our dog, and myself were all home, when all of a sudden both our garage doors opened up at the same time. Later that day, Alex and I went down to tell Grandma about it, and she told us something really weird that happened to her on the morning in her bedroom. She was getting ready and had a box of bobby pins sitting on the dresser. She told us she turned around for a split second or two to grab an item from her nightstand, and when she turned back to her dresser she noticed the bobby pins were scattered everywhere all over the dresser, and some were already on the floor. The box can't knock itself over and scatter pins all by itself. Someone or something did that within the split second she took her eyes off the dresser, and something was most definitely messing with us that day. My grandparents' kitchen was located directly underneath my room upstairs, and a lot can be heard through that floor since it isn't very well insulated. A new and utterly terrifying phenomenon started to occur one night around 2012 or 2013, and it happened multiple times year after year, and sometimes still happens to this day. It began to happen every so often. A couple of times a year I would encounter this. In the middle of the night, I would start to hear the cabinets in my grandparents' kitchen open beneath me. They were very squeaky cabinets, and it sounded like someone was putting dishes away. I'd hear the mugs in the mug cabinet clank against each other, and I also heard plates and bowls clang together like they were being stacked one on top of another, and I'd hear the cabinet slam shut, as they notoriously do when you close them because of the hinges. But it really unsettled me because each of those times I was fully aware that no one was in that kitchen, and this was just happening by itself in the dark down there. I'd gone down to check the first time it happened, and no one was in the kitchen, nor had anyone been up other than myself. This went on for a while, and I don't think anyone really took me seriously when I would bring it up. It was especially terrifying when it happened one night when my grandma was at a physical rehab in 2014 after breaking a hip. My sister Alex was with a friend that night, so absolutely no one was downstairs. Later that night at 3 a.m, I had just laid back into bed after using the bathroom, and I started to hear the silverware drawer open down beneath me in the kitchen. I heard what sounded exactly like my grandma's silverware being moved around, and then I heard a cabinet open and dishes move around the house again, as if someone were putting them away or taking them out. Almost every time this happened, I'd hear a mug or something slide across the counter down there, and it scared the living daylights out of me on that particular night, because I knew for an absolute fact there was no one down there. This was a different kind of fright to experience, since I'd been used to this happening when everyone was home. But at this point I was horrified by the basement, and from that point onwards I avoided the basement at night. It always had a very different energy, and at night you feel that energy through the entire house. I became very on edge after this, and was fully aware we were experiencing a poltergeist in the house, considering everything that happened prior to this, which I battled with a lot in my mind because I was raised Christian, and I thought I had been protected by evil or malicious entities. It confused me. My sister Alex was far more terrified of the basement than me, since her room was down there, and so much so that she would have me walk her down to her room when she would get off to work late at night. The fear instilled in us was very high, because we couldn't see or know what presence was with us, but we felt it and were aware of it. But now being able to see what you're dealing with makes it scarier. We were not taken very seriously when we would have conversations about it with our father. Our father seemed to be the only person in that house that had really never experienced anything, but our mother was more open to it and had experienced things, as I'd mentioned before. Not only did I used to hear someone or something coming up the steps using the creaky railing in the middle of the night when no one was there, but my mum did as well, and it scared her for sure. But she experienced it on more than one occasion, and it happened several times. It's a very slow descent up the steps, with someone using the railing, and no one's visibly there. She said it happened one time around 5 in the morning when she would go up to take Bella outside, and sometimes it would happen earlier in the night. I heard it at least once in the middle of the night before, but can't recall exactly how many times, as it was a rare occurrence. A new phenomena started up around the same time that I started hearing activity in the kitchen below my room. Alex and I have both heard this. My grandparents bought this crappy high-efficiency washer-dryer set in 2010, and every time you would touch a button on either the washer or dryer it would beep. We became very familiar with the type and tone of the beep it would make. There were many nights where I definitely heard that beep, and it would be multiples of them, and then just stop. You'd hear buttons being played with. My sister heard it from her room as well, and would ask me the next day if I was down there doing laundry, and I never did laundry that late. Sometimes she would hear it, and I didn't, and vice versa, and we took note of this new phenomena. My sister had a really horrific and over-the-top experience one afternoon, while she was napping in her bedroom. She told me it felt like she had been waking up, and she started to hear the fan on her nightstand begin to accelerate, running faster and faster each second, and after she noticed that, she said it felt like the upper left corner of her mattress was being lifted, causing her to tilt sideways, and she immediately ran out of the bed and flew upstairs to tell us about it. Alex often heard very strange sounds outside her room in the hall while living down there, and also in her room while she was trying to sleep. Well, one night something very severe happened that required the whole house to get up. I don't have a great memory of it, but Grandma Betty was the first to hear it, as in the middle of the night she was awoken to a banging sound, and she got up and went to the living room, and realized it was coming from the exterior wall of the house. Whoever it was must have been on her deck near her windows, as they began banging on the back wall of the house, and she said the banging was so loud and intense that it shook and vibrated the walls. She got my parents up, and I was awoken from all the commotion. I was so disoriented from being asleep that I didn't really care about it. If I remember correctly, Grandma said she looked out the window and turned the deck light on, and it abruptly stopped and no one was out there that she could see. It would be absolutely off the wall for it to be a person, because rarely anyone knows about our private neighborhood along the golf course hidden in the trees. None of us on this street have ever experienced anyone trespassing on our property before, as it's an extremely quiet and safe area. But I knew what it was, and it definitely wasn't a person. It was clear to me that this was the entity that had been present with us all these years. Alex moved out in 2015, leaving me as the only child in the house. Not much ever happened after that, and the activity definitely declined, and it was a rare occurrence if anything did happen. There were a few times where I would be home after school, and it was just Grandma downstairs, and I would hear knocking coming from the hallway. One time I heard what sounded like a hammer banging a nail into a beam underneath my bathroom, but no one was down there doing such a thing. It was only me and Grandma home, and it was absolutely weird as hell. After that, the activity was pretty much non-existent, up until 2018. In February of 2018, I had a full-on undeniable poltergeist experience while I was up texting on my phone at 2 a.m. This was the weirdest thing I'd ever experienced in the house, and it came out of nowhere. I was in bed in the dark one night, no fans on or anything, just silence in the house. That was until I suddenly heard the light switch down beneath me flip on in my grandma's kitchen. When the light switch turned on, I also began to hear a beep accompanying it, and I figured that it was from her microwave that is plugged into the same circuit as the light switch. Then I heard my grandma's walker roll onto the hard kitchen floor, and I heard it slowly roll to the far side of the kitchen directly under me, as if she was going to the fridge. Then I instantly remembered that my dad got her a new microwave, and he plugged it into a different circuit, and the microwave didn't beep anymore when you turned the lights on. I heard a cabinet open down there at the same moment, and decided to go to make sure it was actually my grandma, because it was a bit suspicious now, considering that I'd heard things from down there many years prior. I literally took off out of my bed and ran downstairs to see that all the lights in the basement were off, and my grandma's bedroom door was closed and no lights were on in the kitchen at all. I felt a rush of terror, and I flew back upstairs into bed. That was not Grandma. Yet it sounded exactly like her walker. How in the world is this even possible? I know for a fact I heard it. I remember to this day still how clear each sound was, and it was a very routine type of sound that I was always used to hearing anyway. I started frantically texting my sisters and my friends about what just happened after getting back into bed. And at that same moment, I began to hear plastic grocery bags crinkling beneath me in her kitchen, like someone was messing around with her box of used grocery bags. I had just gone down there, and no one was in or near that kitchen. What the hell was I hearing? What I had experienced was like a replay of my grandma routinely going into her kitchen to fix herself something. I wanted to believe it was a residual haunting, but that doesn't just explain why. First of all, I heard all the bags wrinkling, and it also doesn't explain why I never heard that again after that night. It only happened at one time and never again, to me at least, or to my knowledge. It was a completely spontaneous event. In 2019, I was forced to move downstairs into my sister's old room, and I was honestly terrified. When I was a child, I attempted to sleep in Lauren's room a few times, and each time I would be unable to do so. I felt a high level of terror for no apparent reason, and I would have to go back up to my own room. Knowing I'd never been able to sleep down there, and knowing that the basement is sort of like the epicenter of the activity in the house, I was absolutely terrified out of my mind for the first few weeks. It ended up being a really good move though. It was peaceful for the most part. I rarely ever experienced or heard anything at night, but I had been sleeping with 2 fans on so that I wouldn't hear anything that would be happening. I knew I would be too scared, and I just didn't want to risk hearing anything, especially as I had a job at this point in life and really needed my rest to be undisturbed. There was one time when I was down in my room in the afternoon, and I undoubtedly smelled cigarette smoke. I couldn't figure out why or where it was coming from, so I chalked it up to coming from somewhere outside, even though that didn't really make sense. One time I did hear something. It woke me up one morning in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. It sounded exactly like someone took a walking cane and smashed it at the end of my outer door frame. I heard a smash twice, and that was it. I got up and my grandma wasn't up yet. No one else was present down there. I ended up moving out in 2020, but things around the house didn't end there. I can't remember which one, but a few Christmases ago, my sister Alex stayed at the house overnight for Christmas Eve into Christmas Day. And when I came over on Christmas Day, she told me she had been kept up all night by strange sounds in the basement. She was sleeping on an air mattress in our old room downstairs, and she had even heard activity going on across the hall in our grandma's kitchen, and she said she heard the silverware drawer open and silverware get messed up when she knew for a fact no one was there, and there were no lights on down there either. She was petrified. Alex told me she thought years ago when I told her about that happening that I was just making it up, and it was a horrifying realization that night for her that I had been telling the truth, as now it was happening to her all those years later. It was just the confirmation it wanted to prove to her, I suppose. Earlier last summer I stayed there while my parents were on vacation. I was there with my grandma downstairs and had Bella with me. I was staying in my old room upstairs and kept Bella close to me at all times, since she was 16 and getting quite old. The first night I got there, something really weird happened that had never happened before. I went into the living room to turn some lights on as I arrived at the house after work in the evening, and my parents had left hours prior. The second I laid my finger on the lamp in the living room to turn it on, everything in the entire room turned on at the same time. The chandelier above the stairwell, the TV, the DVD player, everything switched on simultaneously. I stood back in shock, trying to figure this out. As I did, I noticed I left the bathroom light on down the hall, and at the same time the chandelier turned off, then turned back on a few seconds later. Had there been a power failure? Surely everything would have gone out, but it was only the chandelier light that still had a good bulb in it. 15 minutes later, my grandma was downstairs calling me, because 15 minutes prior, when the entire living room came alive, the electricity in her bedroom had gone out, and she had to reset the breaker. I cannot begin to explain this one. It goes so far beyond comprehension because none of that is physically possible to just happen on its own, and it did even as my father said. And I felt that the energy was giving me a clear message, and that it was still present there in the house, and it was making me aware of that, or simply pranking me. Just last October I went and stayed at the house alone for a week. Grandma was downstairs as usual, but it was much darker and much eerier because we had just put our precious Bella Bear to sleep late July due to very declining health. So the wound was still open from losing a very important and loyal family member from my childhood. The house was absolutely lonesome without her. I didn't have her comfort anymore while I stayed upstairs alone while my parents were on vacation, and it was downright terrifying in that house, more than usual. I heard a couple of loud slams from downstairs near the end of the night a few times that week, but nothing noteworthy happened. The house just felt very dark. The final thing I will bring up is that we have a lamp in this house that turns on all by itself sometimes. It happened one time in the middle of the night when I had been staying there, and my mum told me that it happened all the time. In combination with everything that has happened in the house over a 23-year span, I still don't have an explanation for any of it. We have only speculated on what it could be. My sister Alex made the suggestion that it could be the spirit of our grandfather, but I reminded her that the activity began 11 years before he passed away. However, we both said the activity wasn't happening anywhere near as much before he had passed in 2011, and it seemed to really spark after he was gone. I am extremely aware that the spiritual world is very real. I've become so fascinated in the supernatural, being someone who has witnessed it so much, and I've learnt so much about it over the past decade. From what I've learnt, we had a mild haunting compared to more severe cases with spiritual warfare and whatnot, and I'm thankful for that, because I'm not going to lie when I say that when stuff happens it really scares me in a way that I'm now used to, but it's really different than other fears. I believe there's been an entity in this house since before 97 when my family bought the home, and I believe it's possible that after my grandfather died, that the entity reacted to his death, and if I'm right, it seemed like it was trying to fool us into thinking it was the spirit of our grandfather, but none of us ever, and I mean ever, felt that at all. My family is still in the house as of today, and there are no future plans to leave. I visit it often as I only live 20 minutes away. I will end this by saying that I have never regretted experiencing anything that we have in this house. I'm very grateful I've been given the sense and eyes to experience the other world, and I'm eternally grateful for these experiences in life, because not everyone can say that they've seen the other side, and once you do, it changes you forever. I live in a 50-year-old apartment building, and a lot of paranormal stuff has happened here. A little bit of background. When I was around 5 years old during a Christmas lunch, one of the neighbours had some friends over. One of them had been dealing with his parents' divorce and was struggling with depression. He told my neighbour he needed to use the bathroom, locked himself in a bedroom, and before anyone could stop him, jumped, terminating his life. I saw him fall that day. I feel sorry for him and my neighbor, who has never forgiven himself for not noticing earlier. Fast forward a few months later, I was watching Digimon in the small studio. My mum and grandma were in the kitchen making dinner, and I hear a female voice calling my name. Well, that's what I thought. I muted Digimon since I wanted to clearly understand if my mum was calling me. Right then and there I hear a female voice humming. It was a new episode of Digimon and I didn't know if it was a character humming, and I thought the TV had something wrong with it. It was supposed to be muted, right? Well, I was about to tell my parents that the TV was not working properly when I noticed the sound wasn't coming from it, but right next to me, about half a meter from my exact location. And yet there was nothing there. I got scared and ran to the kitchen. My mum went and said there was nothing wrong with the TV. 10 years ago, we started noticing weirder stuff happen. Our security guards would tell us that they kept seeing a white figure come out of the parking lot area and stand in front of the pedestrians, and would sit and sometimes fly towards the sky. It would sometimes follow people and try and get their attention, and this was all captured on CCTV. This has all since stopped, as the camera system was upgraded. Several guards have been scared by loud screaming into their ears. They've heard whistling in the parking lot, and of course they check everywhere, but it's so late at night that it wasn't a child pranking them. They even heard the whistling and the source of the sound moving from place to place, and even seemingly going towards the sky. It wasn't the wind, as those were windless nights. People have heard their names being called by male and female voices. A dark figure has appeared multiple times in the basement, scaring neighbors. I've seen a little girl running into my apartment wearing a white dress and straight black hair. She seems to be around 4 to 7, and no one that age has died in my building as far as I'm aware. The most annoying thing of all happened a few years ago. During 2 months, my dog would wake me up between 3:10 and 3:40 a.m. every single day. I wouldn't sleep properly as I had a lot of work from high school. The thing is, my dog barked like crazy. He was scared. He wouldn't stop barking and wouldn't move from the front door. I called security, asking if they had heard any doors opening prior to my dog barking, or if a neighbor had arrived drunk, but they denied anything. I still asked them to keep an eye out if there was a sleepwalker. That was my hypothesis for the first 2 weeks. I started to lose my mind. I couldn't sleep, and I had to lock my dog in my bedroom and hug him until he felt safe. It could take about 2 hours, and by then I had to get ready for school anyway. After a while, my dad and I noticed that before my dog started barking, the automatic lights from the floor would turn on, as if someone were going up the stairs. It stopped at our floor and the dog would start barking like crazy. My dad swung the floor open trying to find a neighbor, probably the culprit of our 2-week nightmare, but there was no one. My dog stood in the doorframe shaking, showing his teeth, and barking in fear. He wouldn't come to the hall with us, and this went on for 6 more weeks. And I couldn't let my dog sleep in my room as he would start barking anyway. It drove me mad. I'm pretty sure none of my neighbors slept well either, but I was so mad that I literally screamed at the ghost to leave me and the dog alone, and I would pray for him to go to heaven, and it stopped after a while. My grandmother lives in the UK, and has a big old house with a huge garden. The house is quite old, as most houses in the UK are, and it was dark and a bit damp. My family is quite large, so whenever there was an event or holiday, we would all gather there to celebrate. There was this unspoken rule as a child to never roam around the house by yourself, especially at night, and to not look into the rooms too hard as you might see something creepy. In particular, there was this one tiny hall that was connected to the front hallway to the kitchen in the back, and it had the laundry stuff there. There was one spot in that hallway that no matter what time of day it was, light just never seemed to hit it. We all felt that there was something there, so we ignored it and avoided being in that corridor for more than a few seconds to run through. I never saw anything there as a kid, but I always got the feeling that if I looked at the wrong time, there would be something looking back at me. Later, my dad told me it was an old bathroom he built for my grandparents that was never used because they felt something wanted the space more than they did. I didn't know it was there for over 20 years. Here's where it gets interesting. Eventually, we moved away from the UK, so it's been like 18 years and we only go back for family matters. My dad stays with his mum and brother at my grandma's place, and my uncle is my grandma's caretaker, so they're happy to have my dad there to help restore the house while the rest of us can't stay because it's too dusty and cluttered. A few days into the trip, my dad said he was having trouble sleeping, and one night he could have sworn he saw someone sitting on his dresser watching him sleep. When he explained the weird feeling he got in the house, my uncle tells him that yeah, it probably was that there was someone watching him, and that he's seen things over the years there too. He said that he's seen a little girl run down the hall and into the wall at the bottom of the stairs a few times, and a huge image of a man's face staring at him in the living room on top of the shadows, moving around and talking while it's only him and my grandma in the house. He goes on to say that the house used to be a much bigger estate and that it was separated into 2 homes. The front door used to be where that little girl kept running into the wall. My uncle smudges the place every week to stop weird things happening, but that week he was so busy he forgot to do it. So when we went to visit during that time, my dad seemed wary of us being alone for too long in any of the rooms while he was fixing parts of the house. At one point my uncle shows us the attic, and we all take turns popping our heads up to see the work they've done. But when it gets to my turn, I suddenly feel like something was watching me. I look around a bit, but as I start to turn my feet, I feel my neck get stiff, like someone was crouching behind where my head was popped up. My mind goes nuts, telling me that something was behind me, and I freeze and slowly climb down the ladder, and I try and remain calm, but my little sister could tell I was shaken, and she later tells me that in my grandma's room there was a spot in the corner where something was watching us and it felt angry. By that point we were all tired and everyone could feel the tense atmosphere, so we cut our visit short that day and went home. But my dad stayed and said he felt it too, especially at night, so we never tried to be alone the whole time he was there. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. If of course you did, you can let me know in the usual way. Don't forget that we've got an app where you can listen to even more stories if you are so inclined, completely ad-free too. And if you want to listen to more videos on YouTube, links are on screen now. Huge thanks as always to my amazing members and patrons for their continued support of the channel, and if you'd like to get some additional perks and find out more, links are in the description. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.